Imagine, just for a second, the heavy, echoing footsteps of an ancient warrior slowly descending the spiraling stone stairs of a high tower. With every single step, the sound reverberates, carrying what our source material calls the terrifying silence of the void. You see, this isn't just an arrival, it's an inescapable judgment. The figure coming down is the Obsidian Knight, and he's clad in armor forged from the solid rock of ancient conviction. Right below him is this bustling marketplace bazaar, essentially a cacophony of modern humanity performing their daily routines. But as his shadow falls over the crowd, a cold, nihilistic stillness literally begins to absorb the brilliant flares of the vendors.
So, welcome to this explainer. Today, we're stepping right into the absolute heart of a grim, dark philosophical fable, The Great Noon and the Shadow of the Night. We're going to follow the Obsidian Knight into that chaotic marketplace and completely deconstruct the profound parables of the approaching Great Noon. Let's dive right in and uncover some of the harsher truths hidden just beneath the surface of our modern existence, which is a really crucial exercise for any student of modern philosophy. Now, to really grasp the Knight's arrival, we have to understand what exactly he's confronting down in that bazaar. And that brings us to this core concept of psychic decay. Now, we're not talking about a clinical or medical term here at all. This is a fatal philosophical diagnosis. Psychic decay is basically the defining internal condition of modern humanity. It's this profound, gnawing suffering that's born entirely from living an inherently inauthentic existence. It is the hollow performance we put on every single day, the inner rot that just festers right beneath our supposedly well-organized lives. The contrast here is incredibly stark, and that's entirely intentional. On one side, you have the Obsidian Knight. He is solid reality, an unwelcome guest from an era where purpose was forged in blood and iron. He brings that terrifying silence. But on the other side, we have the Stargazer, representing the modern inhabitants of the bazaar, and they live upon a gilded scaffold. It's this fragile, towering structure built on psychic decay and frantic virtue signaling. The Stargazer completely relies on these brilliant flares of manufactured hope just to distract from the void. But the second the Knight shows up, those flares are completely absorbed by his cold detachment. Which brings us to the Sovereigns of Honest Decay and the rather painful process of embracing the inner rot. As the Knight wades through the chaotic square, he actually doesn't engage with the frantic stargazers. Instead, he acknowledges a very different kind of inhabitant. He locks eyes with figures known as the Sovereigns of Decay. These are people who understand that genuine substance actually requires a total unraveling of the facade. These sovereigns are literally the only figures in the entire marketplace whose shadows remain just as solid as the Knight's. And why is that? It's because they've completely abandoned that gilded scaffold of societal expectations. They just stopped shrinking from the void. They aren't relying on fake directions or manufactured hope anymore. Instead, they've survived the total unraveling of their own facades and embraced their inner rot. By accepting the raw, unvarnished truth of the human condition, they are standing on the absolute only honest ground left. To break this down, the source text gives us 5 distinct parables, starting with the parable of the mirror of lead. Reflections of the void. The story goes that a man once desperately sought to see his own soul, so he looked into a mirror of gold, but the brilliant gold only reflected a facade of order. Desperate for genuine truth, he traded the gold for a mirror of heavy, dull lead, a metal totally dense with the repressed substance of his forgotten history. Before we see what he actually found in that lead mirror, I want to break the fourth wall for a second and just ask you directly, does your well-organized life simply hide a facade of order? Really think about it. Is the meaning you've so carefully constructed for yourself just a masterpiece of modern humanity designed to pave over a massive sinkhole? It is a terrifying question, I know, but it's exactly the question this fable is demanding that we ask ourselves. Well, when the man finally looked into the dull gray surface of that lead mirror, he definitely didn't see a hero. He didn't see a purposeful, driven individual. Instead, he saw a shadowless man staring right back at him, haunted by linguistic ghosts. That lead mirror stripped away every ounce of flattery. It forced him to stare directly into the hungry void he had spent an entire lifetime trying to avoid. Let's look at how this tension builds as the sun actually rises higher in the sky. The narrative rapidly accelerates here, tracking the escalating destruction of the bazaar's hollow structures as we approach the phenomenon known as the Great Noon. This is a light so bright and so unforgiving that absolutely no shadow can hide.
We move from the morning with the parable of the weighted word, right into midday with the anchor of rot, arriving finally at the zenith, the absolute peak, at the shadow's edge.
And that morning phase brilliantly illustrates our second parable, the weighted word. This is a profound and frankly a pretty grim philological deconstruction of modernity. A scholar spent decades hoarding words like morality and virtue, genuinely thinking they were solid, valuable coins. But as the honest light of the great noon approached, these words were suddenly hollowed out. They lost all of their value. They were revealed to just be borrowed costumes, linguistic ghosts with absolutely no substance behind them. The scholar looked into his purse, expecting to find wealth, but found it filled only with psychic decay and a handful of dust. Every single grand word he spoke sounded exactly like the groaning of the earth beneath his crumbling scaffold.
Which brings us right into midday with the third parable, the anchor of rot, where the towering outward structure shattered into fragments of stagnant time. This is the story of a sailor who was absolutely terrified of the existential emptiness of the open sea. So what did he do? He built a massive outward structure of wood and iron, decorating it with brilliant flares of hope just to anchor himself to the shore. But when the great noon arrived, the storm completely shattered his towering structure. As he clung to the wreckage, he made a shocking discovery. The only thing keeping him afloat was the silent rot of the wood he had spent his entire life trying to repair. The decay he so deeply feared was actually the only honest ground preventing him from sinking into the void. As the great noon reaches its absolute zenith, we hit the fourth parable, the shadow's edge. Picture this. Two shadows meet at the edge of the marketplace. One is cast by a pillar of solid rock. It remains totally unmoved, serving as a silent rebuke. The other is cast by a stargazer up on his gilded scaffold. But in the too honest light of the great noon, the stargazer's shadow violently begins to fluctuate. He tries to ignite more flares, he tries to virtue signal harder just to stabilize his form, but the light passes right through his lack of genuine substance. By the absolute peak of noon, the stargazer is revealed as a shadowless man. He's just a hollow outward appearance with zero core.
Now, there is a massive danger here, which is the trap of cynical knowledge, or a false overgoing. Faced with this terrifying revelation and the relentless approach of the obsidian night, the stargazer does react, but he doesn't embrace the truth. Instead, he falls right into a highly modern trap. He frantically retreats into cynical knowledge, essentially walking through a masterpiece of self-deception. First, he acknowledges his inner rot with this ironic sneer. Then, he openly mocks the paralyzing fear of the void, pretending like he's totally in on the joke. And finally, he actually weaponizes his psychic decay, turning his own brokenness into a brand new, edgy form of virtue signaling. He mistakes this ironic detachment for true mastery. He thinks he's achieved some sort of philosophical overgoing, but it's entirely fake. Because ultimately, the cynical knowledge is nothing more than a borrowed costume masking his refusal to embrace raw truth. This cynicism, it's literally just one more floor added to the very top of his gilded scaffolds. It is desperate intellectual armor, and it is about to meet the crushing, solid reality of the obsidian night. And here we reach the climax of our fable with the fifth and final parable, the final scaffold and the ritual of total unraveling. An architect spent his entire life building a towering masterpiece of fake direction, adding floor after floor of meaning just to impress the High Inquisitor. He firmly believed the sheer height of his intellect and societal standing would protect him from the festering inner rot at the base. But then, the night arrives.
So, the most crucial point is what happens next during the collapse. The heavy, echoing footsteps of the night draw closer and closer, and the tower begins to loudly groan under the immense weight of its own inauthenticity. The architect realizes, way too late, that this was never a sanctuary. It was always a ritual of total unraveling. The footsteps hit. The entire gilded scaffold violently shatters. The architect's masterpiece of internal suffering is utterly destroyed in a single instant. And the ultimate lesson is revealed right there. The only way to survive the arrival of the night, the only way to truly endure the great noon, is to let the scaffold completely collapse and to finally stand bare upon the ruins.
Which basically leaves us standing in the metaphorical dust of the marketplace, looking at the total wreckage of our own constructed meanings. We are forced to ask ourselves this final, highly provocative question. When the too honest light of the great noon arrives, will you let your gilded scaffold fall?
Will you stop performing, strip away those borrowed costumes, and finally stand firm upon the honest ground of your own inner truth? Or will you be revealed in the very end as just another shadowless man? It is a heavy thought to carry with you today, but an absolutely essential one. Thanks so much for exploring the depths of this explainer with me. Keep questioning the structures around you, and until next time, keep learning.